Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a books beside my bed video for you where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. We have 9 books to talk about, so we're going to jump straight in. Starting off with a couple of kids titles. The first one that I read, which was part of my August TBR, is Ramona the Brave by Beverly Cleary, which is a very famous, very kind of old school middle fiction story. It's about Ramona, who is a young girl. She currently shares a bedroom with her sister. She's about to get her own room, but her mum is also about to go back to work for the first time. And Ramona doesn't cope with that particularly well. She has quite a few tantrums and things like that. It was an interesting reading experience going back to this because to me this is kind of an old school middle fiction kind of book and very US based. So it was interesting to read it, but I remember seeing these when I was growing up and I also see them on shelves all the time. So it was really fun to kind of go and experience it and read what is considered, you know, a classic or a contemporary classic. I also read a book called Squishy Taylor and the Question of Trust by Ailsa. I actually read this one while I was at work because a group of students were participating in a writer's workshop with Ailsa, which is how I heard about the book. And then I went and raided our school library and found a copy of it. This is a middle fiction story about Sita, or her nickname is Squishy, and she lives with her blended family. So her dad and her stepmom and her 2 stepsisters. And this is the 3rd book in the series. So there's a bit of history between Squishy, her sisters, and the next door neighbor who they don't get along with. In the past, the girls have gotten into trouble because they put out a very mean video about him, but they still don't like him. And in this book, in the middle of the night, they hear noises coming from his apartment while he is away. And then they find out that there are some diamonds that have been stolen in the city because they think there's a break-in next door. The police come and they talk to the whole family, and suddenly the girls find themselves trying to prove that their next door neighbor is a diamond smuggler, and they get into all sorts of trouble and mischief. And this is a really good book because it does look at trust and how we behave and how we treat people around us and how we judge people on first appearances. It has quite a lot of lessons for Squishy in terms of realizing that there are consequences for her actions while also still allowing her to be a tenacious character. So this was a really interesting one to pick up and read. I also reread Lioness, Rampant by Tamora, which is the 4th and final book in the Song of the Lioness quartet. And this one picks up a little bit after the first book. So Ilona is returning back to the city because Jonathan is about to be crowned king and they need to reconcile. But what I had completely forgotten was the first half of this book, which is Ilona going on a quest to retrieve a magical stone and meeting Liam, who is the Shang Dragon. Yes, the Shang Dragon. I completely forgot that was even a thing in here. So that was fun. It's interesting because, you know, this is a young adult series where Ilona has a lot of relationships. And I remember when I was going back to read the notes, because the first time I read this, I would not have paid attention to that at all. I wasn't a romance reader. I didn't really care. Reading the author's note at the back talking about how much flack she copped because Ilona seemed to bed hop a lot. It's like, well, she wasn't bed hopping. She had boyfriends and was exploring relationships with people. Yeah, like I can't believe I'd forgotten about Liam because he was a really interesting character. I kind of wish we'd got more of his history because his relationship again is complicated with Ilona because he doesn't believe in magic. He doesn't trust it and it actually scares him. She has to use her magic, and so that is what ultimately ruins their relationship, but not because they don't want to be friends, not because they don't like each other, but he can't overcome that and she can't stop being who she is. And then of course the relationship with George is like this much, well, I mean her relationship with George is the entire series, but the actual getting together part of her relationship is teeny tiny in this book. So it's funny what sticks with us with series when you read them like years and years ago and you come back to them. And this is another reason why I reread, which I should probably save for that video that I'm going to film on my discussion about why I reread. But it's really like the things that you remember about a series are, and how we change them are so fascinating. I remember when I was reading The Skull by John Klassen, and that was what he was talking about. That entire story came about because he'd read a story and then he couldn't figure out what it was. And so he rewrote the story. But then when he found the original source material that he'd read, it was different to what he'd written because that was what was in his head. So I think that's one of the cool things about books and about stories and about what we take away from them. And then also what sticks with us, what we choose to remember, and then how we choose to share what we know going forward. So I just find that whole thing fascinating. And it was a great experience to reread this series. I'm glad I have these new covers because I absolutely love these illustrated covers. They're gorgeous. I do have my original purple covers somewhere, but I do love these. That's also good because that's a series ticked off my series TBR. So Yay! I also read Sanctuary by Ilona Andrews. This is the first book in the Rampant Chronicles, and I actually have read this book 3 times this week because it's very short. It's only 152 pages long. I got an audio arc from NetGalley, and I got the ebook, and then I listened to the audio again over the weekend just because I wanted some background noise while I was doing a couple of bits and pieces. Also, I'm trying to get the pronunciation right for a lot of the characters and a lot of the creatures so that when we have our live show next weekend, which is this weekend coming up when this video goes live, that I'm able to pronounce things reasonably accurately. It's still not going to happen. I'm going to mispronounce everything. Just you wait. So Ramon is a priest for a Slavic god called Chernobog, and we open the story and it is the holiday season. It's the couple of days leading up to Christmas. Ramon does not like the holiday season. He just wants 3 days off from his god, but he wakes up in a dream and he's doing a job for his god, and so he's annoyed, like just very frustrated of that. His god is breaking his word. When he wakes up, all he wants to do is drink some eggnog and eat the cookies that he's made, and he's found that they've disappeared. And as it turns out, the magical critters and creatures that sort of surround him because he has magic have taken the cookies to give to an unconscious boy in his yard who wakes up long enough to ask for sanctuary and then is unconscious again. And he has a puppy with him. Ramon, being who he is, takes the boy inside, realizes that someone is coming after him, and basically sets up for a siege in his house in the middle of nowhere in the forest. It is a game of matching magical strengths and Ramon learning more about the boy. There is also a priest with the enemy who we can tell is not necessarily there of his own free will. It is all of these things coming together. The mercenaries trying to get the boy, Ramon having to deal with Chernobog and his wife Marina. And it's just really cool because you also see how jaded and how cynical Ramon can be while also being deeply endearing. We also learn a lot more about his past, the fact that, you know, he had a really rough childhood. His rise to becoming the priest for Chernobog was not an easy one, and that growing up he did a lot of things unintentionally that had consequences for other people. And we're also introduced to Andorra, who is mentally blanked on the name, and they have a connection. I'm assuming that this is going to be Ramon and Andorra's relationship at some point. It's not in here. This is purely an urban fantasy story, and it was fantastic. Like, it was great. And if you want to hear me ramble more about it, join the live show next weekend. I also read Kindred by Kirli Saunders, which I think was her first collection of poetry. So Kirli Saunders is a queer Indigenous woman here in Australia. She is a poet, and her word choice and her ability to use words to tell stories through her poetry is just incredible. It's very smart writing as well. It's very contemporary, but it does link to her culture and her connection to country, both past and present, and definitely still tackles, as most Indigenous texts do, the ideas of colonization and the impact on the Indigenous people. So it's a really, really beautiful little collection, and I'm just going to continue to try and find all of Kirli Saunders' works and read them because I'm enjoying it. I also read Light 'Em Up by Kelly Jamieson, which is book 5 in the Bang Brothers series. So this entire series, as I've talked about before, is about a family of hockey players, or brothers who are hockey players, plus a sister who is a former competitive figure skater, and it's her story that we're talking about in this book. But she is also part of the professional hockey world. She has just been signed on as a skating coach for an NHL team. And of course, this creates some waves because the hockey players don't believe that they need skating practice because they're perfect at it, right? And in particular, Logan, who is actually someone that Annie has met before, and they've had a one-night stand, I think either at an international competition or the Olympics or something like that. Since that time, she has also come to really despise him because he happened to lay a hit on one of her brothers that ended up with him breaking an ankle or something like that. Anyway, her brother couldn't play hockey for a while. So there is this animosity between them. Her entire family thinks that Logan plays dirty, and we learn through the course of the book that actually there were other things in play. And as Annie becomes more familiar with how to review and watch how players are skating, she also comes to recognize exactly what happened in that moment and actually becomes a defender for him. The thing that I really liked about this one is that they actually, even though they've had a one-night stand and even though they don't like each other at the start of the book, before a relationship is even a thing, there is still a chemistry there is still an attraction there, but they do build up a relationship first and they build up a friendship, and it comes from Logan really want to improve his game and wanting to finally get off the fourth line and actually make something of his career. And he's dealing with the pressure of having a father who was a former hockey player who was known as an enforcer and who constantly criticizes him if he doesn't make hits or if he doesn't actually you know, play the game the way that it was played when his father played. Whereas he wants to play a new game. He wants to play for himself. And so they work on his technique, and that's how they, you know, they become closer and they actually learn to trust each other again. The other thing that happens in this series is you have Annie's mother who has been visiting all of her children. And I haven't loved that plot, but I've kind of endured it for the sake of the fact that it's part of the story. And it wasn't so terrible. Like, Annie's mother wants all of her children to find their partner and to get married and to be happy just the way that she is with her husband, which straight away you've got to, like, parents have got to stop trying to put their ideals on their children. But it's kind of worked because the kids have all found their partners without her help. And the same is in here. Like, Annie and Logan are seeing each other in secret. They're just not telling anyone at the moment. But her mother comes to town and keeps trying to set her up with her former figure skating partner. Now, Annie and her former figure skating partner are the best of friends. They're like siblings, and they do not want to be in a relationship together, but her mother will not stop and will not relent. And she cracks it when Annie finally reveals that she's with Logan, because the family obviously has issues with Logan. And I loved the rest of the story. If we'd taken the mother plot out of here, this book would have probably gotten 4.5, 5 stars. As it was, I had to drop a full star off it, because that plot was totally unnecessary, and the mother's reaction and the way that she treated her daughter. If one of her sons had done that, I can almost guarantee that it probably wouldn't have been written like that, which really annoys the crap out of me. So, yes, I could have done without the mother plot in this one. I think Annie and Logan were doing fine on their own. They had it covered. They were fine. Annie and her skating partner also totally fine. Loved their relationship. Their friendship was fantastic until her mother stuck her head in. That annoyed me. But anyway, the rest of the book I really enjoyed. It talks a lot about depression, particularly as Annie was finishing up her figure skating career because she was injured and she couldn't skate anymore. And also, you know, how Logan has to talk to his parents and talk to his father about the way that he talks to him about his game. So I enjoyed that. So that's Light 'Em Up by Kelly Jamieson. Also, I think the hockey team that they play for are the New York Bears, which in the hockey world, a lot of teams have similar names and the same names as things. But in this case, I just couldn't get over the fact that it was the New York Bears, because we have the Sydney Bears. And so that's all I was picturing in my head. Totally random. I also read Spy Family Volume 1. This one I had out from Libby, and one of the kids at school has been bugging me to read this series for the longest time. And so I finally had Volume 1, and I accidentally returned Volume 2, and now I have to wait weeks for it to come in. So I'm really frustrated by that. Anyway, this one is about a spy who is told that for his next job, he needs to have a family. He needs a wife and he needs a child, and he needs to get his child into the most elite school in the city. And so he is totally unprepared for this. He ends up at an orphanage and adopts a daughter who happens to be a telepath. And then the two of them stumble across a woman working in a seamstress's shop who happens to be an assassin, although he doesn't know she's an assassin and she doesn't know he's a spy, but the little girl knows both of their secrets. And they create this little found family, and they're trying to get her into the school, and it doesn't go quite as well as they think because the school is highly pretentious. And yeah, it was an interesting experience. So I'm looking forward to reading Volume 2 because I had a lot of fun with it. I laughed out loud a little bit, and I'm curious to see how this story develops. I also listened to the audio for A Thief in the Night by KJ Charles. Interestingly enough, this was the start of me reading 2 historical romances with highwaymen in the same day. This is the story of Toby and Miles. Toby is a thief who has an encounter with Miles at a bar and eventually, you know, steals Miles's watch and wallet. And then a couple of months later turns up at an estate trying to pose as a valet for a gentleman and realizes that it is Miles. And Miles has just inherited a very rundown estate. His father has run it into the ground before his death, and Miles doesn't understand why. Miles and his father had a history, but his father was excited for him to come home and to give him something and to give him something to inherit, but that when you look at the house, you don't get it. Eventually, Toby and Miles find out that Miles's father had purchased jewels, so a necklace and a bracelet, and that suddenly they're missing. The bracelet has turned up on the wrist of the magistrate's wife in town, but they can't find the necklace. And so Miles enlists Toby's help to try and steal the bracelet back. Yeah, it was just a really fun, short historical romance. It's an Audible original. I hadn't read KD Charles before, and so having the audio was great. I was just doing some jobs around the house and listening to it and really enjoyed the experience. And then I read The Queer Principles of Kit Webb by Sebastian. This one I actually listened to the audio of again so that I could do things, but I do have the physical copy of it. Kit Webb is a former highwayman who was injured and so is no longer a highwayman. He owns a coffee shop, and he is approached by Percy, who is a lord. His father is a duke, who is trying to find his original family so that he can basically disinherit Percy and his current wife, who is one of Percy's friends. And so Percy wants to enlist the help of Kit to steal something back from his father that he believes will help bring down his father. Most of the time it is the two of them fighting off their attraction for one another through basic annoyances. There are some scenes where they are learning to fight alongside each other. Kit is teaching Percy how to fight hand to hand. Percy ends up teaching Kit how to fight with a sword. There's also a lot to do with Kit's history and the jobs that he took as a highwayman, and also Kit's relationship to Percy's father and the actions of Percy's father that left him a widower and also saw the death of his young daughter. So there are content warnings in here for that. It was a really fun experience. I mean, I really enjoy Sebastian's writing style, and the audio for this was great as well. So yeah, it was a fun experience, and I just find it really ironic that I was picking up 2 audiobooks, but I hadn't read anything about any of them, and they both turned out to be historical romance highwayman books, which this happens to me all the time. I pick up random books because I don't read the blurbs. You guys know this. I don't read anything about the books before I go into them. And then in a week, I end up reading books with the same character or books with the same theme. I mean, how often do I pick up a historical romance? Anyway, so that's everything that I read this week. In the comments, I'd love to know if you have read any of these books or if you're planning on picking any of them up. Otherwise, feel free to let me know if you're planning on attending the Sanctuary live show with Heather, Megan, and myself, or feel free to share something that you have been reading and loving this week. And just to annoy Ramon, just feel free to leave a Christmas tree emoji down below if you want to let me know that you're here, because why not? Let's annoy a fictional character. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.